At 3 a.m., Keanu Reeves is jolted awake by the sound of fire alarms. His home is burning down. As flames devour everything he owns, he's forced to make a shocking choice about what to save. With millions at risk, what does Keanu prioritize? The answer will leave you questioning what truly matters in life. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. It was 3 a.m. when Keanu Reeves was jolted awake by the relentless blaring of smoke alarms. His heart immediately began to race as he struggled to make sense of the situation. The sharp smell of smoke filled the air, piercing his senses and pushing him into immediate action. There was no time to waste. His house, his sanctuary, was on fire. Disoriented and barely able to process what was happening, Keanu scrambled out of bed, pulling on whatever clothes he could find in the chaos. His mind raced, trying to figure out what to do first. The fire was spreading fast, and the entire house seemed to be consumed by an eerie orange glow. Panic surged in his chest, but he fought to keep it under control. His first priority was making sure his family was safe. Rushing down the hallway, he checked the rooms one by one, calling out for his wife and his young daughter. His feet moved quickly, his thoughts blurring together. The house was thick with smoke, the air so heavy it felt suffocating. Every instinct told him to act quickly, but his training in emergencies kept him calm, his every movement purposeful. "Is everyone okay?" he shouted, his voice hoarse from both the smoke and the panic rising within him. The only sound in response was the sharp crackle of flames and the distant wail of fire alarms. His wife, startled and wide-eyed, appeared in the hallway as Keanu reached their bedroom door. "Keanu, what's happening?" Her voice was full of confusion, but Keanu didn't stop to explain. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the stairs. "Get out, now," he ordered urgently. They rushed through the hallway, Keanu still gripping his daughter's hand tightly, making sure she didn't fall behind. The heat was intense now, the fire creeping closer. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, but there was only one thing that mattered: getting them to safety. As they neared the front door, the fire roared behind them. Keanu paused for a brief moment, his eyes scanning the house. The flames were fast, and the temperature was unbearable, but they had to move. "Let's go. We have to get out now," he urged them again. They stepped into the night air, Keanu's heart still pounding as he checked his family for injuries. He looked back at the house, the flames consuming everything, and for the first time, a wave of helplessness washed over him. His family was safe, but everything else was being destroyed in front of him. Keanu stood outside, watching as flames engulfed his home. The crackling heat mixed with the wail of sirens as emergency responders arrived. His first instinct was to make sure his loved ones were safe. X, his son, was staying with his grandmother, but the panic still gripped him. What had started as a quiet night was now a nightmare. The fire raged, and fire trucks lined the street. Neighbors were gathered in small groups, their faces lit by the glow of the flames. Keanu's heart raced as he saw the firefighters move quickly, their teamwork clear. But his mind was focused on one thing: what was truly important. A firefighter approached him, asking, "Mr. Reeves, is there anything critical we need to save?" Keanu hesitated, the question too overwhelming to answer. He thought of all the irreplaceable items inside: photographs, keepsakes, and memories. But then, his focus shifted to one thing that mattered most: his daughter's favorite toy. The one thing that held meaning beyond the material. "There's one thing," Keanu said, his voice low. "My daughter's toy in her room. If you can, please save it." The firefighter nodded, a look of surprise crossing his face. Keanu watched as they entered the house. The fire was spreading rapidly, but in that moment, his heart felt lighter, knowing his daughter's comfort was safe. Minutes dragged by. Keanu stood back as the fire blazed, his thoughts consumed with his daughter's toy. When the firefighter returned, Keanu held his breath. "We got it," the firefighter said. "It's safe." Keanu exhaled, relief washing over him. The toy was small, but to him it was everything. In the chaos of the fire, it was a reminder that even in destruction, some things were worth saving. As the fire continued to rage in the background, Keanu felt a strange sense of peace. The firefighters had managed to retrieve the toy, and his mind, for the first time that night, felt clear. His thoughts drifted briefly to his son, who would be safe at his grandmother's house, unaware of the destruction unfolding. Keanu took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. There was no telling how much of the house had been damaged. His safe, the family photos, all the items that held years of memories, those were replaceable. The toy, the one thing that truly mattered, was saved. It was a symbol of his love for his son, of a simple, innocent joy that reminded him of what was truly important. The realization hit him like a wave, washing away the chaotic fear and replacing it with an overwhelming sense of relief. The fire chief approached Keanu, his face grim, soot streaked across his uniform. "Mr. Reeves, the damage is significant," he said, pointing to the areas of the house that were already fully engulfed. "We've done what we can, but there's little left inside. We're focusing on containment now." Keanu nodded, his gaze still fixed on the burning house. He hadn't realized how much he'd taken for granted. The routine, the comforts of home. The fire had stripped everything away in an instant, leaving only the most basic things behind: safety, love, and the connection to those who mattered most. He turned to the chief, his voice soft but firm. "Thank you. For everything." The fire chief nodded, his expression softening for a moment. "You'll get through this, Mr. Reeves. We'll make sure nothing else spreads." As the fire began to settle, Keanu looked back at the pile of rubble that had once been his home. His mind wandered to the future, rebuilding, starting fresh. But one thing was clear: material possessions would never again hold the weight they once had. The real treasures in life were the moments shared, the bonds formed, and the simple acts of kindness that brought comfort amidst chaos. Keanu's journey from this point forward would be defined not by what was lost, but by what remained: the strength of family, the power of love, and a renewed sense of purpose. He had always known that life was fleeting, but standing there, watching the remains of his house burn, Keanu realized just how true that was. What he thought he had lost, in the end, was only the physical. What truly mattered would always be by his side. The loss of material things didn't feel like a blow anymore. Instead, it was a lesson, one that reaffirmed the simple yet profound truth that the most important things in life weren't things at all. As the heat from the flames began to intensify, Keanu stood in the midst of chaos, the once familiar home now a battleground between destruction and survival. The house, his sanctuary for years, was engulfed in thick, acrid smoke, and the scent of burning wood filled the air, choking his senses. His heart raced, trying to make sense of the urgency of the moment. But in the midst of the frenzy, there was something else that stood out: the question of what to save. His mind went into overdrive. The fire chief's voice broke through the cacophony of alarms. "Mr. Reeves, we need to know what to prioritize. The fire's spreading fast. What should we focus on?" His words were crisp, professional, but Keanu could hear the urgency in his tone. The fire was moving quicker than expected, and every second counted. Keanu's thoughts immediately flashed through the items in his home: expensive artwork, first-edition books, rare electronics, the kinds of things many would consider irreplaceable. But none of it felt important in the face of what was happening. His mind wandered to a different place, a time when possessions weren't defined by their price tag. He thought of his childhood, the memories that shaped him, things far more valuable than anything that could be bought. "Forget the artwork," Keanu said firmly, his voice steady despite the uncertainty. "Forget the electronics, the furniture. It's just stuff." He took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling in. "There's something more important." The fire chief nodded, waiting for Keanu to elaborate. His team was ready to act, but they needed direction. Keanu's gaze shifted as he mentally mapped out the house. His eyes were drawn to the attic, the small, cluttered space where some of his most cherished memories were stored. The box, filled with family photos, handwritten letters from his father, and childhood mementos. The thought of losing those things to the fire hit him harder than the sight of his belongings burning. "I need you to save my childhood mementos," Keanu said, his voice now low but filled with an urgent sincerity. "The family photos, the letters, the things that can't be replaced." He looked the fire chief in the eye. "They're in the attic. Please, it's all I ask." The chief hesitated for a moment, understanding the gravity of the request. "We'll try," he replied. "I can't promise we'll get everything, but we'll send a team in to retrieve it." Keanu nodded, his heart still pounding in his chest. His mind was focused on that small, priceless box. Everything else could be replaced, but those memories were irreplaceable. "Thank you," he whispered, grateful even in the midst of the chaos. The fire chief and his team wasted no time, rushing to execute Keanu's request. The sound of rushing footsteps filled the smoke-filled hallway as fire crews pushed past him, focused on reaching the attic. Keanu could only watch, his mind still reeling. The memory of his childhood, the letters from his late mother, and the photos of moments long past swirled in his thoughts. They weren't just objects, they were fragments of a time that had shaped him, a life he'd built from the ground up. But the house was burning, everything was at risk. Keanu shook his head, trying to clear his mind. The task ahead was clear. His loved ones were safe, but these mementos represented something deeper, something that grounded him in ways material wealth never could. For the first time in his life, he wasn't worried about the next big project, the next film, or the upcoming public appearance. His entire focus was on the people who mattered most, his family, and on preserving the past. Minutes ticked by as he stood at the edge of his front porch, watching the scene unfold. Firefighters continued their battle against the blaze, hoses pouring water on the flames that leapt higher with each passing moment. Neighbors, still in shock, gathered along the perimeter, their faces illuminated by the eerie orange glow. Keanu could feel the sting of their gazes, their curiosity mixed with concern. They were used to seeing him as a public figure, but tonight he was just a man, standing in the wreckage of his life, trying to hold on to what little he could. Suddenly, his phone rang in his pocket, breaking through his thoughts. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was his agent. For a moment, Keanu thought about ignoring it, but something about the tone of the call made him hesitate. "Keanu, are you okay?" His agent's voice sounded strained, but there was something else in it. Genuine worry. "We're getting reports about the fire. We heard you're safe, but I just wanted to check in." "I'm fine," Keanu replied, the words coming out more sharply than he intended. "I'm safe, and X is safe. That's all that matters." His agent hesitated, likely sensing the depth of Keanu's emotions. "Of course," she said softly. "Is there anything you need? Anything I can do?" Keanu's gaze drifted back toward the house, the flame still rising, devouring everything in their path. He felt a strange calm settling over him. "No," he answered, his voice steady now. "I'm handling it. But I'll call you later. Right now, there's nothing else I need." As he hung up the phone, he was left standing alone with his thoughts, the night air thick with smoke. It was as though everything in his life had been stripped down to its rawest form, leaving only the most important pieces behind. His home was burning, yes, but he had his son's memories and the future to look forward to. He could rebuild, he thought, but only because of what truly mattered. As the firefighters battled the flames, Keanu stood there, silent, his heart heavy but resolute. The sirens had quieted, replaced by the sound of water splashing against the inferno, the hiss of steam filling the air as the fire began to subside. The burning house seemed almost unreal, like a scene from a movie. But this was real. This was his life, his memories, his home. He could see the fire chief working methodically with his team. The paramedics who had checked on him were busy coordinating with the firefighters, ensuring everyone was safe, while the fire chief approached him once more. His face was smeared with soot, and his uniform was soaked from the water, but his eyes showed an understanding, a shared silence between them. He knew the importance of the task at hand. "Mr. Reeves, we've secured your son's items as best we could," the fire chief said, his voice steady, though there was a touch of weariness in it. "The robot and the dragon, they're both safe. We couldn't retrieve much else. The rest of the house is heavily damaged." Keanu nodded slowly. He hadn't expected miracles, but hearing the words still struck him deeply. His son's favorite toys, the two objects that meant the world to him, had been preserved. That was enough for now. He walked over to where the firefighters were unloading the objects they'd managed to salvage. They had wrapped the toy robot and dragon in protective coverings. His son would have them. Despite the devastating loss, Keanu could breathe easier knowing that at least some of what truly mattered had been saved. The fire chief watched him for a moment, then asked, "Anything else we should be aware of? Any other personal items you want us to prioritize?" Keanu's mind raced once again, as it had done when he was first asked what mattered most. In the chaos, his thoughts always circled back to one thing: the sentimental objects. The treasures that were irreplaceable in his heart, not on any insurance claim. But it wasn't just the items. It was the spirit behind them, the memories attached to them. And those memories, he realized, would always stay with him. "Nothing else?" Keanu finally said, his voice calm but resolute. "The most important things are here. That's all that matters." The fire chief nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We'll keep doing everything we can. You're safe, Mr. Reeves. That's the important thing." Keanu's gaze shifted back to the house, the smoldering remains of a life that had been, but deep down, he knew that he was about to embark on a new chapter, one that he would face with his son by his side. A new beginning. The fire crackled and roared, consuming everything in its path. Keanu stood outside, a growing distance between himself and the burning house, his heart pounding in his chest. The heat from the flames stretched far beyond the house's perimeter, and he could feel it through his clothes, searing into his skin. His mind was fogged with the weight of what was happening, unable to focus on anything but the overwhelming sight of his life disintegrating before his eyes. He had built this home with his own hands, the architecture a reflection of his taste, his success, and his desire for a peaceful refuge. And now it was all gone. The fire, a result of some unforeseen fault, spread through the rooms quickly, devouring memories, art, family heirlooms, and expensive collectibles. It seemed surreal. This wasn't just a house to him. It was where he had gathered every little memory from his past, from his childhood to his life with his son, and now it was melting away like candle wax under an unforgiving flame. As he watched the firefighters continue to battle the blaze, his mind began to race. Among the many items inside, the rare artworks, the intricate sculptures, and the high-end electronics, the question kept echoing in his mind: what would he truly want to save? In the face of the fire's rage, Keanu realized the answer wasn't about wealth or possessions. His childhood, the keepsakes from his early life, the small mementos that told the story of who he was, those were the things he needed to preserve. He stepped forward, approaching the fire chief with calm but decisive strides. Despite the chaos around him, there was no hesitation in his voice as he called out to the chief. The fire chief was standing near the front line of firefighters, coordinating their efforts. His voice hoarse from shouting over the loud whir of the hoses. "Chief!" Keanu's voice rang out, cutting through the noise. The fire chief looked up, his face strained but focused. "Yes, Mr. Reeves?" His tone was professional, but there was a flicker of concern behind his eyes. It was clear that he understood the gravity of the situation. Keanu paused for a moment, trying to collect his thoughts. He knew what he was about to ask would likely surprise the chief, but the weight of it felt oddly comforting in a world of chaos. "I don't care about the art or the electronics," he said quietly. "Please focus on my childhood keepsakes. I have some things in my old room, mementos from my childhood, that mean more to me than anything else." The fire chief blinked in surprise. It wasn't often, if ever, that someone with Keanu's wealth and stature would prioritize something so seemingly insignificant in the face of an emergency like this. His eyes searched Keanu's face, looking for a sign of jest, but found none. Keanu's expression was serious, almost serene in its determination. "Childhood keepsakes?" the fire chief asked, as if to confirm. Keanu nodded. "Yes, there are some things in a small box in my old room. Some old letters, trinkets, photos. Those are the things I want saved." The fire chief looked down at the blueprints displayed on his tablet, assessing the location of the room Keanu mentioned. There was a flicker of disbelief in his eyes, but it quickly passed. This wasn't an unusual request for Keanu, it was just unexpected. Usually, people asked for valuables, things with high dollar values. But this was different. This was about sentiment, about memories. "Understood," the chief replied, nodding at Keanu. "We'll do our best, but we'll need to move quickly. The fire's spreading faster than we anticipated, and the roof is compromised." He motioned to his team, issuing commands into his radio to direct them towards the bedroom Keanu had indicated. Keanu stood still for a moment, watching as the firefighters scrambled to organize their efforts. Despite the chaos, he felt a sense of calm come over him. He had made his choice, and now he was at the mercy of fate. The rest of the house was burning. There was no way to save everything. But this small box of memories represented something far more precious. He thought back to his childhood, the years growing up, the hardships he had faced, and the small moments that had shaped him into the person he had become. Those mementos were the pieces of him that could never be replaced. The photographs, the letters, the little trinkets his family had given him. They told a story of resilience, of love, and of finding joy in the small things. As the fire raged, Keanu's thoughts turned to his son. He had always been careful to teach him about what truly mattered in life. Success and wealth were fleeting, but love, memories, and human connection were what shaped a person's legacy. His son was far away, safe at his grandmother's house, unaware of the fire that was consuming everything they had built. Keanu was grateful for that. He didn't want his son to experience the fear and uncertainty he was feeling now. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He could hear the roaring of the fire in the background, the crackle of wood, and the sharp, piercing sound of glass shattering. The house was on the verge of collapse, but Keanu couldn't look away. He needed to know if they could save the one thing that mattered most. He needed to know that the small box of memories could survive. The fire chief returned to him, his expression grave. "We've secured the room, Mr. Reeves. We're going in now." Keanu nodded silently, his heart pounding in his chest. Everything else, the wealth, the fame, the luxury, could be replaced. But the memories of his childhood, the tokens of the life that had shaped him, were irreplaceable. Those were the things that truly mattered. As Keanu watched the firefighters work tirelessly, his gaze never wavered from the glowing structure in front of him. The flames were growing, consuming the heart of the house, and yet he couldn't tear his eyes away from the room where his childhood keepsakes were. He thought about how life had led him to this very moment, a moment where his most prized possessions weren't the things that glittered, the things that had a price tag attached to them, but the intangible things that could never be bought. In the midst of the fire, he had asked for the unlikeliest of items, a few pieces of memorabilia from his childhood. He thought about the letters his mother had written to him when he was young, filled with wisdom and love that no amount of wealth could ever replace. He remembered the old teddy bear he used to carry around, the one that his grandmother had given him, the one he'd kept hidden in his closet for years because it reminded him of his roots, of where he came from. Suddenly, the fire chief emerged from the smoke, his face streaked with soot, but there was a look of triumph in his eyes. "We've got it, Mr. Reeves," he said, his voice hoarse from the smoke. "We got the box. It's intact." Relief washed over Keanu as he exhaled deeply. The firefighters had done their best, and they had succeeded. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to relax, even if just for a moment. The fire continued to rage behind him, but in that moment, the only thing that mattered was that those precious memories had been saved. "Thank you," Keanu whispered, his voice barely audible. The fire chief gave him a small nod, acknowledging the weight of the request and the importance it held. Keanu glanced back at the scene in front of him, the firefighters, the wreckage, the ruined house, and felt a quiet sense of peace settle in his chest. The fire had taken so much, but in the end, it had also revealed what was truly irreplaceable. His belongings, his fame, even his wealth, were just things. But the memories, the pieces of his childhood, those would stay with him forever. As the smoke began to clear and the fire trucks and ambulances slowly started to leave, Keanu stood there in the stillness of the night, staring at the blackened ruins of his home. He felt an overwhelming gratitude for what had been saved, for the firefighters who had risked their lives to protect something that wasn't easily understood by many. This was the moment that would stay with him, the realization that, even in the midst of devastation, the most important things in life couldn't be touched by fire. Keanu stood a few yards away from the inferno, watching in disbelief as the flames devoured his home. The sound of crackling wood and the smell of smoke filled the air, a stark contrast to the once peaceful silence of his family's sanctuary. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat heavy with a sense of helplessness. The house he had built, the space where so many memories were made, was now being consumed by the fire. As he stood there, his mind raced with thoughts of what was being lost. The rare book collection that had taken years to amass, the priceless artworks that adorned the walls, the countless possessions that had come to define his life. They were all at risk. Yet, despite the destruction unfolding before him, there was one thought that stood above all others: his son, X. At least X was safe at his grandmother's house, away from the chaos. That brought him a small measure of relief. But the loss of their home, the place where they had laughed, argued, and dreamed, was a blow he couldn't yet comprehend. Keanu tried to focus on the firefighters, who were working tirelessly to contain the flames. But with each passing minute, the fire seemed to grow stronger, pushing deeper into the heart of the house. The fire had already spread through the eastern wing, where the utility room and electrical panels were located, and it was now engulfing the living areas. The home was built with state-of-the-art materials, but the fire was relentless. What had started as a small electrical malfunction had turned into an uncontrollable blaze. He knew the firefighters were doing everything they could, but the reality was that some things simply couldn't be saved. As the heat intensified, Keanu felt an overwhelming sense of loss. It wasn't just the possessions or the house. It was the idea of home, of security, the place where X had learned to walk, where they had shared family dinners, where Keanu had spent countless nights reflecting on the meaning of his life, was being destroyed in front of him. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His home was burning, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. His mind flickered back to all the moments that made that house theirs. X's first steps, their late-night talks, the laughter that filled the air during family gatherings. The memories were slipping through his fingers as quickly as the fire spread, leaving only the charred remains of what once was. As Keanu stood in the growing distance from the flames, he couldn't help but feel the magnitude of what was happening. The fire was no longer just a threat to his material possessions. It had become a metaphor for something deeper, something he had been unwilling to face until now. The house, the center of his life with X, was being reduced to ashes. It was the space that had once felt like an unbreakable foundation, but now it was crumbling before his eyes. His thoughts shifted to X. His son had always been his most cherished part of life, and yet now, in this moment of crisis, Keanu couldn't help but feel a sharp pang of guilt. He had worked so hard to provide the best for his son, but in this instant, none of it seemed to matter. It wasn't the rare artwork or the vintage books that would comfort X. It was the security and warmth of a home, the space where they had created their memories together. That was the true loss. X wasn't just his child, he was his legacy, his future. The thought of the young boy waking up the next day to learn that their home was gone filled Keanu with an overwhelming sorrow. He thought about how the fire had stolen the very essence of what they had shared. The cozy moments on the couch, the bedtime stories, the laughter that had echoed throughout their home, now reduced to smoke and dust. Keanu's hand tightened around the blanket the paramedic had draped over him, but it did little to stop the chill creeping into his bones. The night air had grown colder as the fire raged on, but it wasn't the temperature that made him feel so numb. It was the sinking feeling that came from watching everything he had worked so hard for disappear in an instant. The fire wasn't just destroying a house, it was destroying the idea of a safe place, a foundation that had been a steady part of his life for so long. As the fire continued to consume the house, Keanu realized that his perspective had begun to shift. The material world, the luxury, the wealth had always been there, but it was never the reason he worked so hard. It had been for the moments of connection, for the stability and love he could provide X. And now, as the flames tore through his home, Keanu understood that those things, those memories, could never truly be destroyed. As the firefighters continued to battle the flames, Keanu stood still, absorbed in his thoughts. His gaze never wavered from the raging inferno, but his mind was elsewhere, tracing through the memories that the fire was threatening to take from him. He could still hear X's laughter in his mind, see the tiny hands rearranging his favorite robot collection. The fire wasn't just taking material things. It was taking the intangible connections, the small, everyday moments that made their lives rich. He thought about X's bedroom, the toys and the makeshift rocket ship drawings that cluttered the walls. That room had been a sanctuary, a place of endless imagination and play. X had always been so proud of his space explorers, of the toys he had carefully placed on shelves, with the loving attention of a child whose world was simple yet profound. But now, that room was just another casualty of the fire. The walls, the window, where X's favorite toy robot had once stood were now gone, erased by flames and smoke. The emotions hit Keanu harder than he expected. He had lived with the belief that no matter what happened, he could always rebuild. After all, he had everything he needed: wealth, resources, influence. But in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was his connection to X, the bond they had nurtured within these walls. The house wasn't just a building, it was the vessel of their lives together, of all the days spent reading, laughing, and simply being present for each other. The fire wasn't taking possessions, it was taking the heart of their home. In the midst of all the destruction, Keanu realized something profound. The things he could replace, the things that could be rebuilt, didn't matter in the long run. What mattered were the moments, the memories, the quiet afternoons spent making lunch together. His heart ached at the thought of losing those irreplaceable pieces of his life. X, still blissfully unaware of the devastation at home, was with his grandmother, safe from the chaos. Keanu was grateful for that, but the fact remained that he was standing here, a silent witness to the loss of everything that had anchored him. As much as he had tried to control the world around him, to ensure that everything was perfect for X, the fire had proven one thing. Sometimes, the things you can't control are the most important. As the fire was finally brought under control, Keanu stood on the sidewalk, watching as the fire crews continued their work. The house that had once been filled with memories, laughter, and life was now a shell of charred wood and broken glass. There was no turning back. The damage was done. Keanu's chest tightened with the weight of the situation. His thoughts kept returning to X. The young boy had been spending the night at his grandmother's house, but Keanu knew he would soon have to explain what had happened. The reality of losing their home settled heavily on his shoulders, but in the midst of it, a single question lingered. What had truly been lost? The fire had consumed so much: the artwork, the books, the memories stored within the walls of their home. He had always placed value on these things. He worked hard for them, created a beautiful space for himself and X to enjoy. But now, standing in the remnants of what had been their sanctuary, Keanu began to question what mattered more. He knew he could rebuild the house. He could replace the possessions, but there were some things that couldn't be replaced, things that couldn't be rebuilt with money or effort. The firefighters had worked tirelessly to control the flames, but now Keanu was standing in the aftermath, surrounded by a crew of responders who had done their best to save what they could. As he gazed at the burning remains of his home, he realized that, despite the material loss, there was something more valuable that still lingered in his heart: the relationships, the love shared with his son, and the memories of their life together. "Mr. Reeves," one of the firefighters called as they approached, holding a tablet. "We've managed to contain the fire, but there's significant damage to most of the property. We can try to retrieve anything you'd like, but it'll be difficult with how much has been affected." Keanu nodded, his mind racing as he considered his options. There were so many things he could ask them to save: priceless artwork, expensive electronics, important documents. Yet, in that moment, something inside him shifted. As he stood on the cold concrete, watching his house burn, he realized what he valued most. Keanu stood frozen for a moment, looking back at the smoldering house. The fire had left its mark, a scar on the building, but also on his heart. He couldn't help but think of X, his son, and how he would react to seeing their home reduced to ashes. The thought of explaining the loss to him weighed heavily on Keanu's mind. It was more than just the house. It was everything they had built together, the place that had been their sanctuary, their safe haven. As the firefighters moved carefully around the ruins, assessing what could be salvaged, Keanu was struck by a feeling of quiet resolve. The possessions he had accumulated over the years didn't matter in the same way anymore. They were just things that could be replaced. The love and connection he shared with X, however, could not be replicated. That was the foundation that kept him going, that kept him grounded through the chaos of the night. "Mr. Reeves, if you'd like, we can go inside and see what can be saved," the firefighter said, his voice steady and professional. Keanu nodded and followed him inside, his heart pounding as he stepped over the debris. The house was no longer the familiar space he had spent so many years in. It was a shell of what it had once been. Walls that had once echoed with laughter were now blackened and torn. He walked slowly through the rooms, each step heavy with the weight of what had been lost. But as he made his way into the back room, something caught his eye. Amidst the rubble, he noticed a small collection of items neatly arranged. It was a small display, something that had clearly survived the fire, untouched by the flames. Keanu's heart skipped a beat as he recognized what it was: his childhood mementos, neatly preserved in the corner of the room among the wreckage of everything else. Among the scattered debris, Keanu's eyes locked on a familiar shape, a small metallic object that seemed to shimmer in the light filtering through the smoky haze. It was a toy robot, one he had cherished as a child. His heart raced as he carefully reached out, brushing away some of the charred remnants of the house to reveal the toy fully. There it was, perfectly intact, just as he had remembered it. The robot was a simple toy, nothing extravagant or valuable in the material sense, but to Keanu, it symbolized something far more significant. It was a connection to his youth, to simpler times before the weight of the world had pressed down on him. He had spent countless hours playing with it, letting his imagination run wild, envisioning grand adventures in outer space. For a moment, Keanu stood there in silence, holding the toy robot in his hands, as the reality of the situation settled in. The house, his possessions, even the expensive artwork that had once adorned the walls were now gone. But this small, unassuming toy had survived, and in a way, that was enough. It was a reminder that, even in the face of overwhelming loss, something irreplaceable could still remain. Keanu looked around at the devastation, his mind still grappling with the scale of the destruction, yet in his hands he felt a quiet sense of relief. This one piece of his past had been preserved, and in that moment it felt like a symbol of hope, a reminder that not everything could be taken away. He walked outside, still holding the robot, and made his way over to the waiting fire chief. The firefighters had worked tirelessly to contain the blaze, and despite the damage, they had managed to save a few precious items. Keanu felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for their efforts. They had risked everything to protect what they could, and in a way, they had given him a piece of his childhood back. Keanu's eyes widened as the firefighter, who had been part of the team fighting the blaze, approached him with a small, carefully wrapped bundle. The firefighter held it out, his expression a mixture of pride and exhaustion. It wasn't a bundle of documents or a precious heirloom. There were no priceless paintings or expensive gadgets. No, what the firefighter had carefully wrapped was something entirely different. A small, worn toy robot, unmistakably Keanu's childhood memento. For a moment, Keanu stood still, feeling a surge of emotion as his gaze fixed on the toy. It was simple, nothing extravagant, but to him, it was invaluable. It had been a fixture of his childhood, a companion in a world full of endless possibilities, a piece of his youth that had carried him through some of his most formative years. He had lost so much in the fire, his home, his possessions, his sense of stability, but now, here in his hands, was a symbol of something irreplaceable, something that, despite the odds, had survived the flames. The firefighter watched Keanu's reaction, his face softening. "I wasn't sure it was still intact when we found it," the firefighter said. "The second floor was already getting pretty bad, but I knew it meant something to you." He paused, glancing at the toy robot before meeting Keanu's eyes. "I couldn't leave it behind. It was the only thing in that room that had real value." Keanu's heart swelled as he listened. The simple act of saving that toy had not only preserved a piece of his past, but had also reminded him of something deeper. This wasn't just about things. This wasn't about wealth or status or objects that could be replaced. This was about what truly mattered, the memories, the connections, the moments that shaped a person's life. The firefighter hadn't just saved a toy, he had saved a part of Keanu's identity, a link to a time before the weight of the world had been on his shoulders. Keanu gently cradled the toy robot in his hands, his fingers brushing over the worn edges, the faded paint, and the scratches that had come with years of use. This was more than just a toy. It was a marker of time, a reminder of who he had been as a child. Back then, there was no pressure of the world, no demands of fame or responsibility. It was a time when a toy like this could be the most important thing in his world. Holding it now, amidst the devastation of his home, Keanu couldn't help but feel a quiet, almost surreal gratitude. The firefighter, sensing the deep emotional connection, gave Keanu a moment to collect himself before speaking again. "I figured you'd want it," he said softly. "In all the chaos, when the fire's roaring and everything's burning, sometimes you don't think about the small things that matter. But this robot? It's something that means something beyond the material. It's personal. Keanu nodded, his throat tight. Thank you, he managed, his voice thick with emotion. You didn't have to go in there for this. The risk you took. He trailed off, unable to find the right words to express his gratitude. What had just been a toy to so many had become something so much more, a beacon of all the things he held dear, his childhood, his memories, and the simplicity of a life before the weight of the world had been placed upon him. The firefighter smiled, shrugging slightly. We do what we can. I wouldn't have left it behind either. It's the little things, right? The things that are irreplaceable. The things that mean something that no insurance policy can replace. This robot? It's got meaning. And that's why I had to save it. Keanu couldn't speak for a moment, his mind swirling with the strange mix of loss and relief. He'd spent years accumulating wealth, properties, and things that could now be reduced to rubble by the flames that had ravaged his home. But in his hands, as he looked at the little robot, he realized that none of that mattered. What truly mattered were the connections, the memories, and the simple joys that couldn't be measured by any standard other than love. Keanu stood there for a moment, his thoughts a quiet storm inside his head. The chaos of the fire seemed so distant now, almost surreal. He had watched his life, his home, and his possessions burn to the ground, but this tiny toy robot in his hands grounded him. It was something that had survived both the flames and time, and somehow it symbolized everything that was worth holding on to in life. I thought it was gone, Keanu said softly, gazing at the small robot. I thought I'd lost it forever. The firefighter gave him a knowing look, his expression sympathetic. It's easy to think that when everything around you is burning, but sometimes what we think is lost is never truly gone. You just have to look for it, even in the ashes. The firefighter's words rang with a quiet wisdom, one that seemed to echo Keanu's own feelings about what was truly important in life. Keanu nodded, his heart swelling with an unexpected sense of peace. The fire had taken so much, but in the midst of all the destruction, this one small act of saving something so deeply personal had given him a sense of closure, a feeling that no matter how much he had lost, he had gained something even more valuable. Perspective. Thank you, Keanu repeated, his voice breaking the silence. For saving this? For saving a piece of who I am? The firefighter smiled warmly, patting Keanu gently on the back. It's what we do, sir. We protect the things that matter most, even if it's just a little robot. Keanu chuckled softly, his emotions raw, but his heart filled with a profound gratitude. You don't understand, he said, shaking his head. This robot. It's more than just a piece of plastic. It's a reminder of everything that matters in life. My childhood, the simple things that I almost forgot were important, my son's smile when he looks at it. It's everything. As the firefighter looked at him, Keanu could see a silent understanding pass between them. The simple act of saving this childhood memento had changed something in Keanu, reminding him of the parts of life he had almost lost sight of. The things that truly mattered were never the possessions or achievements. They were the moments, the people, and the memories that shaped us. For the first time since the fire had broken out, Keanu felt like the weight on his shoulders had lightened. The house could be rebuilt, the possessions could be replaced, but this little toy robot was irreplaceable. And with that realization, Keanu's outlook on what truly mattered in life had shifted forever. He looked at the small robot again, remembering how much time he had spent with it as a child. He had built imaginary worlds, gone on adventures, and had countless conversations with that toy. To anyone else, it was just a child's plaything, but to him it was a bridge to his past, something that reminded him of the simpler times when he had a sense of wonder and an untainted outlook on life. Holding it now, amidst the destruction, He felt connected to a part of himself he had long since forgotten. "I'll make sure this stays safe," Keanu said, his voice firm with determination. "It's not just about keeping it intact. It's about honoring what it represents. I won't forget why it matters. Not again." The firefighter nodded, sensing the depth of Keanu's emotions. "You're a good man," he said quietly. "It's an honor to have helped you save something so meaningful." Keanu smiled at him, the gratitude in his eyes evident. "Thank you for everything. It means more than you know." As the firefighter turned to help the other responders, Keanu stood there for a moment, clutching the small robot to his chest. The fire had taken so much, but in the end, it had given him something even more valuable: a renewed sense of what truly mattered. And in this small, fragile toy, Keanu had found not only a piece of his childhood, but a reminder of the importance of family, memories, and love. Things that no fire could ever take away. Keanu stood still, staring down at the toy robot in his hand. The house that had once been filled with warmth and memories now lay in ruins behind him. The firefighters had done their best, but there was no denying the destruction. Yet, in his hand was something priceless, something that could never be replaced. The small robot, though burned and slightly damaged by smoke, was the last link to his past. As he stood there, Keanu was overwhelmed by the weight of what the fire had taken from him. Not just the material wealth, the artwork, or the expensive gadgets that had filled the house, but something deeper. The fire had stolen parts of his life that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. It had taken away the memories of his son growing up in that house, the quiet moments shared with friends, the laughter echoing through the halls during holiday gatherings. These were the things that truly mattered. The toy robot was a relic from a simpler time, one when Keanu's world was filled with curiosity and imagination rather than deadlines and board meetings. As a child, he had spent hours playing with that robot, inventing stories and exploring new worlds. It wasn't just a toy, it was his companion during the quiet moments of childhood, a friend in a world that often felt too big to understand. The realization struck him with a sudden clarity. Wealth and fame were fleeting. They came and went, like the tide that could rise and crash at any moment. But the simple things, the small connections and memories, those were what truly lasted. The robot represented a time before all the complexity of life had set in. It was a reminder of who he had been, a boy with dreams and hope in his eyes, before the weight of the world had made him forget how to dream. As he stood there, holding the robot close, Keanu couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. This toy, though small and insignificant to anyone else, had endured. It had survived the fire. It had remained when everything else was gone, and it reminded him of the person he used to be. Keanu's thoughts wandered back to his childhood. The memories felt vivid now, more alive than ever. He could remember the days when he would sit on the floor, his tiny fingers carefully maneuvering the robot's limbs, imagining grand adventures and explorations. It wasn't just a toy, it was a bridge to a world where anything was possible, where the future held endless possibilities. The excitement of discovery, the thrill of imagination. Those were the moments that shaped him. As he traced his fingers over the robot's worn features, Keanu realized just how much he had changed over the years. In the chaos of his adult life, with its constant demands and pressures, he had lost sight of the simpler joys that had once filled his heart. The weight of responsibility, the fame, the expectations. It had all consumed him in ways he hadn't fully recognized. But now, in the quiet aftermath of the fire, with the toy robot as his only tangible connection to his past, Keanu understood something important. The robot wasn't just a memento. It was a symbol of innocence, of hope, and of the dreams that were still buried deep inside him. In all the years of building empires and navigating the fast-paced world of business, he had forgotten the power of hope, the kind of hope he had as a child. This toy, though small and seemingly insignificant, represented something bigger than all the material success he had achieved. It represented the core of who he was, a person who once dreamed of creating something meaningful, not just for himself, but for the world. He could almost hear his younger self laughing, imagining new worlds and new possibilities. The robot had always been there, steadfast in its purpose. It was a constant, a reminder of the dreams he had once believed were achievable. Keanu looked at the toy robot now in his hands and realized the true value of the memories it held. It wasn't the money, the fame, or even the accolades that would stay with him forever. It was moments like these, the quiet, simple ones, that mattered the most. His life, in all its grandness and challenges, had often felt like a whirlwind, pulling him from one task to the next. Yet, in this stillness, as he held the toy and reflected on his past, he understood something profound. The moments of connection, the bonds with those he loved, and the memories of his childhood were what truly made life meaningful. As a child, he had imagined worlds where he could be anyone, do anything. And in some ways, those dreams had come true. He had become a famous actor, a global icon, and was fortunate to have had opportunities that many could only dream of. But as he looked at the toy, Keanu realized that the greatest adventure wasn't in the successes or the recognition, but in the relationships and the shared experiences that defined his life. Those were the treasures that couldn't be measured in money or status. He thought about his son, how much he would cherish this same toy one day. Keanu wanted to pass down the same sense of wonder, imagination, and joy that had been a part of his childhood. He hoped that his son would understand that the true essence of life wasn't about what they owned, but the love they gave and received. That was the real legacy. Not the material wealth or the accolades, but the deep emotional connections that last far longer than any object could. Keanu stood there for a long while, lost in nostalgia, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. It was a reminder of who he had been and who he wanted to continue to be. Holding the robot felt like holding a piece of his past, a past that had shaped him into the person he was today. The toy symbolized innocence, dreams, and a time when life was simpler. It was more than just plastic and metal. It was the key to a part of himself that he had almost forgotten in the chaos of adult life. It reminded him that while the world had changed, the things that truly mattered had always been the same. In that moment, Keanu understood that no matter what he went through or what he achieved, the most important thing was to stay grounded in what really mattered: his family, his relationships, and the memories they created together. Keanu stood by the fire trucks, watching as the firefighters continued their work. The flames had been quelled, but the damage was already done. His once pristine home had been reduced to a charred shell. He felt a weight in his chest, not from the loss of material wealth, but from the memories that were now gone with the smoke. He was surrounded by the firefighters who had risked their lives to save what they could. They had done their best, and Keanu knew that. But what they had saved, his toy robot, was the one thing that mattered to him most in that moment. He turned to one of the firefighters who had been part of the team that managed to retrieve it. "Thank you," Keanu said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved something that means more to me than I could explain." The firefighter smiled, nodding, and replied, "We did what we could, Mr. Reeves. Glad we could help." Keanu looked at the group of firefighters and then spoke again. "I know that it might sound strange," he began, "but it's not the expensive stuff, the artwork, or the technology in my home that really matters. It's the things that hold memories, the objects tied to moments, to love, to relationships." He paused, looking down at the toy robot in his hands. This robot was something from my childhood, something my parents gave me when I was young. It's a part of me. And you all made sure that it was saved." The firefighters exchanged glances, some of them nodding slowly. Keanu's words seemed to resonate with them more than he expected. The notion of protecting memories rather than things had struck a chord with them too. They had spent years saving people's possessions, but often, in the chaos of emergencies, they didn't have the time to reflect on the significance of what they were saving. For Keanu, this moment was about far more than just salvaging objects. It was about preserving what truly mattered. One of the firefighters, a woman with dark hair and a quiet demeanor, stepped forward. "I get what you're saying, Mr. Reeves. We've been through plenty of fires, but it's always the personal items that hit the hardest. The photos, the keepsakes, the things that can't be replaced." She looked at the toy robot in his hands. "We can replace things with money, but we can't replace the memories attached to them. It's that connection to our past that we really try to protect." Keanu nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the firefighter's words. They shared a silent understanding. To them, it wasn't just about extinguishing flames. It was about saving what was irreplaceable to the people they were trying to protect. His thoughts returned to his son and the toy robot he had cherished since he was a child. The robot represented a world of imagination, dreams, and love from his parents. It was part of his childhood, something that, despite all the wealth and fame he had gained, would never be replaced. Keanu looked around at the remaining structure of the house. The fire had taken so much, but somehow, amidst the destruction, this small object, this childhood toy, had been saved. It was almost ironic. In a house full of priceless items, it was the simplest, most sentimental object that had survived. The value of the toy robot wasn't found in its price tag, but in the memories it carried. He took a deep breath, still overwhelmed by the surrealness of the situation. He walked slowly around the yard, his fingers tracing the worn edges of the toy. The cool breeze, which had once felt comforting, now felt strange, as if even the air had been affected by the fire's devastation. The sounds of the emergency vehicles had finally quieted down, but the heaviness remained. One firefighter, an older man with a thick beard and a weathered face, approached Keanu. "It's not often you see someone more concerned about memories than stuff," he said quietly. "But I get it. You've got a perspective that not many people have." Keanu smiled faintly, his eyes fixed on the charred remains of what used to be his home. "I suppose when you've been fortunate enough to have everything you could ever want, you realize that it's the things you can't replace that matter most. The people, the memories, the moments, they're irreplaceable." He paused. "This toy robot, this is my connection to simpler times, to my parents, to the dreams I had when I was young." The firefighter nodded thoughtfully. "It's funny," he said. "You'd think the big stuff would be what we save, gold, artwork, all that. But it's the small things, the ones that hold the most meaning, that often get lost in the shuffle. I've seen it time and time again. Families losing everything except for that one little thing that meant the world to them." Keanu looked down at the toy robot again. The memories flooded back of his childhood, his parents, and the simpler days before everything became complicated. He could remember the excitement in his heart when he first received the robot. It wasn't the most expensive gift, but it was the most meaningful. It was a gift that sparked his imagination and reminded him of the importance of curiosity and wonder. Keanu turned back to the group of firefighters who were now watching him, each face filled with respect and understanding. His gaze lingered on each of them, knowing that they had risked their own safety to save whatever they could. These people, who had fought tirelessly to contain the fire, had seen their own share of loss, and yet they understood the deep value of preserving what mattered most. Their quiet strength was something Keanu couldn't help but admire. "You know," Keanu said softly, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him, "I've spent most of my life focused on things, on business, on achievements, on gaining more. But in moments like these, it becomes clear that the things we collect aren't what we'll remember. It's the moments we share, the love we give, and the memories we hold on to. That's what stays with us." The firefighter who had spoken to Keanu earlier nodded slowly, his eyes softening. "You're right, man. It's easy to get caught up in what we don't have, what we think we need. But when you lose everything, it's like you realize that the best things are the ones you can't buy. You can't put a price on memories and the love that comes with them. It's something you have to experience to understand. Keanu felt a lump form in his throat as he nodded in agreement. He hadn't just lost a house or material possessions. He had almost lost the very memories that made his life meaningful. And in that moment, he understood something profound. No matter how many things he acquired, the most important parts of his life would always remain intangible. "I appreciate all of you," Keanu said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "What you did today means more than words can express. You saved more than just objects. You saved pieces of my life, and I'll never forget that." The firefighters, many of whom had been in high-stress situations before, seemed to be moved by Keanu's words. It wasn't just about doing a job anymore. For them, it was about making a real difference, protecting what was irreplaceable. The atmosphere that had surrounded the fire scene had shifted from one of chaos and destruction to something deeper, something about connection, empathy, and what truly matters in the end. Keanu walked slowly through the remnants of his home, his assistant by his side. The scene before him was almost surreal. Everything he had worked for, everything that had once defined his success, now lay in ruin. The walls, once a place of warmth and comfort, were now blackened and scorched. What had once been a beautiful, welcoming home now felt hollow, its structure barely holding together. Yet, despite the devastation, Keanu felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. As he moved through the living room, the smell of smoke still thick in the air, Keanu took a deep breath, trying to absorb everything that had happened. His mind, which had been racing since the fire, began to settle. There was no immediate need for panic or grief. The important things, his son, his friends, his loved ones, were safe. The house might be gone, but the intangible things, the things that could not be destroyed by flames, still remained. His assistant, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Keanu, I know this is tough, but we'll rebuild. You'll have a place just as beautiful, if not more so." Keanu nodded but didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked to what had once been the kitchen, now reduced to a smoky, charred space. The countertop where he had spent countless evenings with his family was now a jumble of ruined appliances and ash. Yet Keanu didn't feel anger or sorrow as he looked around. He felt something else, a deep sense of perspective. "We can rebuild the house, the possessions, all of it," Keanu said quietly, his voice almost drowned out by the sound of crackling embers. "But some things, like memories, can't be replaced. What matters most is what we carry with us, not what we leave behind." His assistant looked at him, clearly expecting more of an emotional reaction. But Keanu's calm demeanor was something else. It was as though the fire had allowed him to see past the surface of his life, the wealth, the material success, and focus on what was truly valuable. Keanu continued walking through the remnants of the house, his eyes scanning the burned remains of what had once been a place of peace and sanctuary. Each step he took felt heavier, yet strangely purposeful. He reached what had been the hallway leading to his son's room. The door was charred, but still hanging on its hinges, a symbol of what was lost. He couldn't help but pause, thinking about his son, about how X would eventually have to process this moment too. He and X had spent so many nights in this house, laughing, talking about the future, sharing quiet moments of bonding. Those memories, Keanu realized, were safe. No fire could take them away. He glanced back at his assistant, who was still standing in the doorway, waiting for him to say something more. But Keanu didn't have any words of bitterness or regret. There was no sense of anger over the destruction of his possessions, just a strange peace that had settled within him. "I always thought that things defined success," Keanu said softly, turning back to face his assistant. All these years, I worked so hard to accumulate them. And now, standing here, I realize that none of it matters if you don't have the people you love beside you." His assistant nodded, understanding the depth of Keanu's words, even if they still hadn't fully processed the weight of the loss. The house had been a symbol of his success, but now, in its absence, Keanu had found clarity about what truly mattered. Keanu paused in front of the fireplace, the place where they had spent many evenings. Now, it was just a cold, hollow space. The irony wasn't lost on him. This space that had once been the heart of their home, where they shared meals and conversations, now stood as a reminder of how fleeting everything truly was. Success. It doesn't come from what you have, it comes from what you give and who you share it with, Keanu continued, his voice steady but filled with an undeniable warmth. Everything else is just temporary. His assistant stood beside him, silent, taking in the weight of his words. Keanu's focus was no longer on the material losses, but on the future. What was important now was the lessons he had learned and how he would use them to continue building the life he wanted. The fire had taken the house, but it had also opened his eyes to something much greater. Keanu turned to face his assistant, who had been quietly observing him all this time. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, something that went beyond words. The house might have been reduced to ash, but Keanu's purpose remained intact. The fire had revealed the truth of what he had always known, but hadn't truly understood until now. The most important things in life couldn't be lost, even in the face of devastation. As Keanu moved slowly toward the back door, he glanced out at the charred remains of the backyard. The garden he had spent years nurturing, planting, and tending to with his own hands was now just a mess of scorched earth and broken pots. Yet, in a strange way, he wasn't saddened by it. The garden, like everything else in his life, was temporary. It was the love he had for his son, the moments they shared, the quiet connections he had forged with the people around him. That was what would endure. "I used to measure everything by what I had," Keanu said, his voice quieter now. "But you can lose everything in an instant. The house, the cars, the artwork, it's all just stuff. What matters is the relationships, the people, the memories. Those are what last." His assistant smiled faintly, taking in the significance of Keanu's words. "It's hard to let go of things." Keanu nodded. "It is. But we're often holding on to the wrong things, thinking they define us. I think I finally realized that what I've built, outside of my career, outside of the fame, is the most important thing I have. The people who care about me, the love I give, the love I receive. That's what I'm taking away from this. Everything else, it's just stuff." They stood there for a few moments, the silence of the destroyed house wrapping around them like a blanket. Keanu felt at peace, a weight lifting from his chest. Yes, he had lost a lot. Yes, the fire had been devastating. But in that quiet moment, Keanu realized that what he had gained was far more valuable than anything he had lost. The destruction had forced him to see the bigger picture. Life was about more than just acquiring wealth or possessions. It was about the love and human connection that anchored him, the family and friends who stood by him, the people he helped. And now, in this moment of loss, he could see that those things, those irreplaceable, intangible things, were the true treasures of his life. Turning to his assistant one last time, Keanu gave a small but resolute smile. "We rebuild. Not just the house, but the future. And we'll do it with the right priorities in mind." The assistant nodded, as if to say, "We will." But Keanu could see in their eyes the same understanding he had come to. They would rebuild, yes, but this time with a clearer vision, a deeper sense of gratitude, and a stronger connection to what truly mattered. Keanu stood at the threshold of what was once his home, now nothing more than a skeletal frame surrounded by a haze of dust and debris. His eyes swept over the remains of the structure, still processing the magnitude of what had happened. The fire had taken nearly everything: his house, his memories, the pieces of his life that had defined him. But as he stood there, watching his team begin the long process of assessing the damage, a quiet resolve settled over him. The physical damage could be rebuilt, he knew that. But it was the emotional toll, the weight of the memories lost, that would take longer to heal. Keanu had always been a private person, valuing his inner circle and the connections he had built over the years. Yet, as he gazed out at the wreckage of his life, he understood more deeply than ever the importance of those connections. They were the threads that held him together in the face of adversity, and it was those relationships that would help him through this. The house, with all its possessions, could be replaced. But the people who had supported him, the love he had for his son, the quiet moments shared with friends and family, those were irreplaceable. Keanu felt a renewed sense of commitment to them all. He would rebuild, not just the house, but the emotional bonds that had been forged over years of shared experiences. His assistant approached him, holding a clipboard and speaking softly. "We've started the preliminary assessments, Keanu. We're prioritizing safety measures and we'll start the reconstruction as soon as possible." Keanu nodded. "Good. We'll take it one step at a time. I want this to be more than just a house. I want it to be a home again." His assistant looked at him with a mix of concern and admiration. "It will be. You've already shown us that it's not about what's lost, but what we can build from here." Keanu turned and walked slowly back toward the site, feeling the weight of the decision ahead of him. It was not just about rebuilding a house, but rebuilding the life he had with his family. He thought about his son, how he had been spared the trauma of seeing their home destroyed, and how the most important thing now was ensuring that X understood the lessons he himself had learned, that love, family, and memories could never be destroyed by fire. As he spoke to his assistant, Keanu made another decision. "Let's make sure the new house isn't just built with materials. I want it to be built with intention. It's not just about walls and rooms. It's about creating a space where memories can continue to grow. A place where we can make new memories together." The assistant nodded, understanding exactly what Keanu meant. They would rebuild the house, but the heart of it, the emotional connections, would be at the center of their focus. Keanu turned his attention back to the team, already busy with the work ahead. He had the support of people who shared his vision and values, and that gave him a sense of peace amid the chaos. The road ahead was long, but he was ready. As days passed, Keanu began to adjust to the recovery process. He focused on rebuilding the house, but more importantly, he recognized the emotional journey ahead. The house could be rebuilt, but emotional healing would take time. Keanu's determination remained steady, and he knew the new home would be a reflection of his values: sustainability, warmth, and connection. Sitting with his assistant one afternoon, Keanu discussed plans for the new home. "I want it to feel like a sanctuary, open, airy, and filled with natural light. It's not just about luxury, but creating a space that nurtures us and reflects who we are," he explained. The assistant nodded. "We'll make sure there's plenty of outdoor space too for you and your family to unwind." Keanu smiled, feeling the weight of their shared vision. "Perfect. X will grow up here, and it'll be a place where we can create new memories." Looking out the window, Keanu felt a quiet sense of resolve. Everything else can be replaced, but the moments we share, that's what truly matters. His assistant agreed. Keanu's resolve to rebuild, not just the house, but the emotional bonds, was unwavering. The new home would be built with love, purpose, and the promise of a fresh start. Keanu's thoughts turned inward as he prepared for what lay ahead. While the physical aspects of the house would eventually be rebuilt, it was the emotional recovery that would take time. but he knew he was capable of facing it, with the strength of his family and the memories that would continue to shape him. He was not just rebuilding a house, but rather reinforcing the foundation of his life. That evening, after a long day of meetings and plans, Keanu sat down with his team. "We'll make sure this place reflects the journey we've been through," he said. "It'll be a place where X and I can grow, with a fresh perspective on what truly matters. We'll be creating new memories, stronger ones." The team nodded in agreement, their dedication clear. Keanu knew this wasn't just about materials, it was about forging something real. "We're doing this not just for comfort, but for connection," he added. As the planning continued, Keanu felt a sense of quiet contentment. The house would be rebuilt, and it would stand as a symbol of the values that mattered most to him: love, family, and the lasting connections that can never be destroyed. Keanu sat across from his son, watching him examine the toy robot. Though worn and faded, it still held the same magic for Keanu that it did when he first gave it to X. "Daddy, do you remember when you gave me this?" X asked, holding it carefully. Keanu smiled. "I remember. You loved space, and I wanted you to have something that could help you imagine your own adventures." The robot wasn't just a toy. It was a piece of their shared history, a symbol of imagination, of Keanu's commitment to nurturing X's dreams. "Do you still think about space?" Keanu asked. "I want to be an astronaut," X said, his face lighting up with enthusiasm. Keanu chuckled, pride swelling in his chest. "That's a big dream, buddy, and you can do it." But as much as Keanu encouraged X to dream big, he couldn't shake the weight of the fire, the loss of their home. Yet, in that moment, the robot served as a reminder of what truly mattered: memories, love, and the bond they shared. "This robot, it's special," Keanu said softly. "It's not just a toy. It's part of our story." X nodded, holding it even closer. "It'll always be with us." Keanu's heart swelled with emotion. The robot was more than just a possession. It was a symbol of resilience, of family, and the unbreakable ties that would never be lost. Keanu reflected on the toy robot as he sat with his closest friends later that evening. They were in the living room, the flickering glow from a nearby lamp casting shadows on the walls. The robot, now cleaned and safe, sat on the coffee table between them. A small figure, but with so much significance. "It's funny," Keanu began, his voice steady yet tinged with emotion. "Out of everything, it's this little robot that survived. But it's not just a toy. It's a symbol of resilience, of how we're still standing, no matter what we lose." His friends exchanged glances, understanding that the robot represented something much deeper than a child's keepsake. It was a reminder of the emotional foundation that could never be taken away. "It's strange, isn't it?" one of them said. "We spend so much time building our lives around things that can be replaced, and then, in a moment, it's all gone. But this," they nodded toward the robot, "this is what's left. This is what we truly value." Keanu smiled, a sense of peace washing over him. The fire had taken so much: his home, his possessions, even his sense of stability. But it had also given him something far more important: perspective. The loss had shown him that the intangible things, the love, the connections, were irreplaceable. "It's not the stuff, is it?" Keanu said quietly. "It's the moments, the people, the way we care for each other. That's what really matters." His friends nodded in agreement. They all knew it too well. The house could be rebuilt. The possessions could be replaced. But this, the bond, the meaning they gave to each other, and the love shared, could never be touched by any disaster. The toy robot wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a testament to the resilience of his family and the importance of staying grounded, even when everything else seemed lost. It had survived because it was part of something bigger than just its physical form. Keanu glanced at his son, who had been playing nearby, and felt a renewed sense of commitment. They would rebuild, not just the house, but everything that truly mattered. Keanu walked over to his son, gently lifting the toy robot into his hands. X looked up at him with bright, curious eyes, as if waiting for his father to share something important. Keanu smiled, sitting down beside him. "Remember the robot you loved so much?" Keanu began, his voice soft but steady. "This little guy was with me when I was your age. I had him when everything felt simple, when the world felt like a place full of possibilities." X's eyes widened as he gently took the robot from his father's hands, cradling it with an almost reverent tenderness. "It's like a time machine, huh, Daddy? It takes us back to those old days." Keanu chuckled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "Exactly, buddy. It's more than just a toy. It's a connection to who we were and who we've become." X nodded solemnly, his young mind absorbing the weight of his father's words. "I think it's cool we both love it so much," he said quietly, as if understanding that this little robot meant more than just memories. It was a symbol of everything they held dear, the resilience, the love, and the strength they shared. Keanu's heart swelled with pride. "It's not about the robot, you know," he explained. "It's about what it represents, our memories, the good times, the challenges, and how we always come through them together." X smiled, hugging the robot tightly to his chest. It was as though he understood, in his own way, that this small object held the key to something bigger than just a collection of parts. It was a bridge between past and present, a testament to the bond that connected father and son, despite the trials they faced. Keanu stood up, looking down at X and the robot, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. It wasn't just about rebuilding a house. It was about preserving the things that mattered most: his son's happiness, their shared history, and the love that transcended material loss. "We're going to make sure this stays safe," Keanu said, his voice full of quiet determination. "Because it's not just a toy. It's part of who we are." X nodded again, a thoughtful smile crossing his face. The connection was clear. It was these moments, this bond, that would help them rebuild. Not just their home, but their future. Keanu stood outside, looking at the wreckage of what had once been his home. His son, X, stood beside him, holding the toy robot tightly in his arms. The devastation was overwhelming. What had once been a place full of life and memories was now just a shell, a skeleton of what it used to be. Yet, as Keanu looked at X, he realized that none of that mattered. "Hey, buddy," Keanu said, bending down to X's level, "I know this is hard, but we're going to get through this together, okay?" X nodded solemnly, holding on to the robot like it was the most important thing in the world. It had become a symbol of their strength, of the fact that some things, no matter how much they were lost, could never truly be destroyed. "Are we going to be okay, Daddy?" X asked quietly, his voice small but filled with trust. Keanu smiled softly, feeling a deep well of gratitude for his son. "Yes, we are. We've got each other, and that's all we need. No matter how hard things get, we'll face them together." The road ahead would be difficult, there was no denying that. The house would be rebuilt, but there would be emotional scars that could not be easily healed. But the one thing Keanu was certain of was that he would always be there for X, to guide him, to support him. Together, they would overcome the challenges ahead. Keanu's assistant, who had been with him for years, approached them. "We've got the paperwork for the insurance sorted, and we've arranged a place for you and X to stay while the house is rebuilt," she said, her voice calm but tinged with concern. Keanu turned to her, nodding. "Thank you. I'm more concerned about X right now. He's been through a lot, and I want to make sure he feels safe." His assistant gave a reassuring smile. "Of course. We'll make sure everything is taken care of, but Keanu, don't forget to take care of yourself too. You're going through this too." Keanu nodded. He appreciated the concern, but he knew his focus had to be on his family. The fire had reminded him of what really mattered: his relationships, his memories, and the bond he shared with those he loved. "Come on, let's go inside," Keanu said, guiding X towards the temporary housing they had arranged. "We've got a lot of work to do, but we'll get through it." As they walked away from the wreckage, Keanu felt a sense of peace settle over him. He was ready for whatever came next. Because he knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together. The temporary housing was modest, but it was enough. It was a place for them to rest, to regroup, and to plan for the future. Keanu and X spent the first few days settling in, sorting through their belongings that had survived, and finding comfort in the small routines they had always shared. Though the house had been lost, the love between them remained intact. One evening, after dinner, Keanu sat down with X at the small kitchen table. The robot, now slightly damaged but still a source of joy for X, sat in the center. Keanu watched as his son carefully cleaned it, wiping away the soot and grime left by the fire. The care X took in restoring it was a reflection of their resilience, something both small and profound. "Daddy," X said, looking up from his work, "do you think we can make our new house even better than the old one?" Keanu smiled, a feeling of warmth spreading through him. "I know we can. We'll make it exactly how we want it, and it will be even more special than before. And the most important thing is that we'll do it together." X beamed at the thought. "Together, just like we always do." Keanu nodded, his heart full. It was moments like this that reminded him of what truly mattered. The house was gone, yes, but they still had each other, and that was all they needed. As the days turned into weeks, the reality of their situation began to set in. Keanu started meeting with contractors and architects to design the new home. Every decision was made with X in mind, from the layout to the special display area for X's growing robot collection. But it wasn't just about rebuilding the physical structure, it was about rebuilding their sense of security, their sense of home. And it was clear that the memories they had, the love they shared, would always be their foundation. In the quiet moments, when Keanu sat alone in their temporary home, he often thought back to the fire. It had been a wake-up call, a reminder that material possessions were fleeting. What mattered was the connection between people, the memories, the bonds, and the love that transcended anything that could be destroyed by fire. And so Keanu carried on with his focus firmly on his family. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but he was ready. With X by his side and the lessons learned from this experience, Keanu knew they would continue to grow stronger together. As the rebuilding process began, Keanu took every opportunity to involve X in the decision-making. They visited the site of their old home together, where the ground was still charred, but the space felt like a blank canvas. Keanu would point out the spots where the living room had been, where they'd shared meals and laughter, and where they'd spent long, peaceful nights together. It was a bittersweet moment, but one that brought them closer as they imagined what would come next. "We're going to build something amazing here, X," Keanu said, his voice filled with determination. "It's going to be our home, our place, and we'll make new memories, better ones." X looked up at the sky, taking in his father's words. "Do you think it will be just like the old house?" he asked, his voice small, though his eyes shone with hope. Keanu knelt down beside him, taking a moment before he spoke. "It will be better," he said softly. "We have the chance to make it exactly what we want, and we'll fill it with more love than ever." X's smile returned, wider this time. "I like that. I like it a lot." Keanu stood up, feeling a sense of pride in his son's resilience. X had faced so much, yet still held on to hope and optimism. It reminded Keanu of his own strength, and of the strength they shared together. Weeks passed, and slowly but surely the house began to take shape. It was a process of both physical and emotional reconstruction. Every detail, from the placement of furniture to the colors on the walls, was chosen with intention. Keanu's team worked tirelessly, but he ensured that X remained a part of it all. Their bond grew deeper as they focused not just on the material aspect of rebuilding, but on ensuring their home was a place of safety, warmth, and memory. And so, the road to recovery continued. Keanu's determination and the support of his team, alongside the quiet yet profound wisdom of his son, allowed them to move forward in a way that transcended the physical loss of their home. The devastation of the fire had left Keanu with a sense of loss, but it had also triggered something within him, a realization of what was truly important in life. As he sat in the quiet of his temporary living space, surrounded by the remnants of their previous home, he reflected on how much he had learned from the disaster. The material possessions that he once thought were so important now seemed insignificant. What had remained, what had truly endured, were the relationships he had built with the people around him, his son, his friends, and the community of responders who had come to his aid. Keanu's thoughts kept returning to the toy robot, the simple object that had, in a way, encapsulated everything he had come to value. It wasn't the house, the cars, or the rare collections that mattered. It was the connections that filled those spaces, the memories shared, and the love that had grown within those walls. This fire, while devastating, had ignited a new sense of purpose in him. He had always been driven by ambition, but now his vision had shifted. His next chapter, he decided, would be about something far greater than wealth or fame. Keanu began to think about how he could use the lessons he had learned to make a lasting difference in the world. He had always been a private person, and his charitable actions, though significant, had often gone unnoticed. But now, after losing so much, he realized that his true calling lay not in collecting more for himself, but in giving back. He wanted to create something that would benefit others, something that would allow people to connect and rebuild their lives, just as he had begun to rebuild his own. His mind began to form an idea, something that would combine his passion for helping people with his desire to leave a legacy of kindness. He envisioned a community center, a place that would not only provide basic necessities like food and shelter, but also foster human connection, a place where people could gather, share experiences, and find the support they needed to regain their sense of purpose. He had seen firsthand how important connection was during the fire, as he had been surrounded by responders who worked tirelessly to save what they could, and friends and family who offered love and support during the aftermath. As he shared his thoughts with those closest to him, Keanu realized that this was the path he needed to pursue. He had the resources, and more importantly, he had the resolve to make it happen. His commitment to helping others had always been there, but now it had a clear focus, a goal that went beyond just writing checks or making donations. This was personal. It was about building something lasting, a community that would thrive on compassion, empathy, and resilience. It was about using the lessons from his own life to help others who were struggling. Keanu spent the next few days in deep contemplation. He began researching community centers, how they were built, and the kind of impact they had on individuals and neighborhoods. He looked at places where people, often displaced by life's hardships, could come together and find comfort, strength, and hope. The idea was clear in his mind. This center would not just be a shelter, it would be a sanctuary, a place where people could heal, connect, and rebuild their lives with dignity. He started speaking to architects and social workers, asking questions, getting advice, and hearing about other successful community projects. There was a spark in his voice as he discussed the vision for the center, the way he imagined it helping people. It wasn't just about providing a roof over someone's head. Keanu wanted this center to be a place where people could rediscover themselves, find their passions, and reconnect with the world. It would be a space for artistic expression, for education, for mentorship, an environment where everyone, regardless of their background or circumstances, would be treated with respect and compassion. Keanu's team, initially surprised by the sudden shift in focus, soon rallied behind him. He had a way of making them see the importance of what he was doing and his passion for the project became contagious. They started working tirelessly, preparing plans, seeking the right people to help, and scouring the community for the best possible location. Keanu wanted to create something that would be a beacon of hope for those in need, and he knew that it would take time, patience, and dedication. But it wasn't just the logistical work that consumed Keanu's mind. It was the emotional aspect of the project. He knew that this endeavor wouldn't just help those who came through its doors. It would change him too. He had already started to see how his own life had been transformed by this experience. The fire had been a wake-up call, a reminder that life's most precious things, love, memories, human connection, couldn't be replaced with material wealth. It was the relationships that mattered most, the bonds that were forged in times of need and adversity. Keanu thought about his son, X, and how much he had grown through this process. The boy, too, had experienced his own loss, the loss of their home and the toys that had been so meaningful to him. But seeing X's resilience, his ability to adapt and find joy even in the most difficult circumstances, reminded Keanu of the power of human strength. X, just like his father, was learning that the things that mattered the most were not the things they owned, but the love they gave and received. Keanu's goal was not to simply rebuild their lives, he wanted to help others rebuild theirs too. He realized that he didn't want to wait for another tragedy to remind him of what really mattered. He wanted to act now, to create something lasting, something that would help people rediscover their strength and their sense of self-worth. And so, with determination and a deep sense of purpose, he set out to make this vision a reality. Keanu knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Building a community center from the ground up would take years of planning, resources, and the support of many people. But he was ready for the challenge. This was the next chapter in his life, a chapter that was no longer about fame or wealth, but about making a meaningful difference in the world. He reached out to people he admired, philanthropists, and leaders in the community, hoping to gain insight into how they had created their own successful ventures. Keanu wasn't looking for recognition or accolades. He just wanted to build something that would outlast him, something that would continue to touch lives long after he was gone. With each conversation, his vision expanded. He spoke with social workers who understood the nuances of homelessness, mental health professionals who could guide the community's healing process, and educators who could help structure workshops and training programs. He wasn't just building a shelter. He was building an ecosystem that could help people in all aspects of their lives, whether it was job training, therapy, or simply a place to rest and gather their strength. Keanu's determination grew stronger each day. He began assembling a team, not just of architects and builders, but of people who shared his values, those who understood the importance of creating a space that nurtured the human spirit. They weren't just building walls, they were building connections. As the project began to take shape, Keanu couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. The fire that had threatened everything he held dear had been a catalyst for this transformation. It had pushed him to look beyond his wealth and possessions and truly evaluate what mattered in life. He had learned that true success wasn't measured by the things you had, but by the impact you had on others, the relationships you built, the love you gave, the kindness you showed. These were the things that would define him, not just as an actor or a celebrity, but as a human being. Keanu's commitment to this cause was unwavering. He would not stop until the community center was a reality, a place where anyone, no matter their past or present, could come to find hope, healing, and connection. It was a long-term investment, one that would require sacrifices and perseverance, but Keanu knew it was the right thing to do. He had seen firsthand how the smallest acts of kindness could ripple through people's lives, changing them in ways that no material possession ever could. The center would be a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the idea that even in the face of destruction, we can rebuild, not just our homes, but our hearts. And in that rebuilding, we discover what truly matters: the love we give, the lives we touch, and the legacy we leave behind. Keanu sat quietly in his temporary home, gazing out at the city skyline. The fire had left him with little, just the essentials, a few cherished possessions and a promise of rebuilding. But it had also given him something far more valuable: clarity. The events of the past weeks had reshaped him, changing the way he saw the world. What had started as a loss had revealed something deeper, something that had always been there, but was overshadowed by fame and wealth, the true meaning of life and purpose. Keanu had always felt the urge to give back, but the fire helped him realize that making a real difference wasn't about grand gestures. It was about small, quiet moments. A child's toy saved from the flames. A stranger feeling seen for the first time. These moments, he knew, were the ones that left lasting impacts. He thought of the toy robot, which had survived the fire. It wasn't just a toy, it was a link to his childhood, to simpler times. The fact that it had been saved felt like a sign, reminding him that the things that truly mattered couldn't be destroyed by material loss. Keanu also thought about his son, X. The fire had shaken them both, but it had brought them closer. They had found strength in each other, bonding over shared memories and the comfort of knowing that no matter what, they had each other. For years, Keanu had been focused on success, fame, and legacy, but now he understood that his true legacy wouldn't come from his career or his wealth. It would come from the lives he touched and the difference he made in others' lives. As Keanu reflected on the fire's impact, he realized that what mattered wasn't what he had lost, but what he could give. Moving forward, his focus would be on helping others, creating meaningful connections, and living a life centered around love and compassion. Keanu knew that the fire had stripped away much of his material wealth, but it had also given him something invaluable: a renewed sense of purpose. As he stood in the wreckage of his home, he understood that, while the loss of possessions could be devastating, it was the connections, the shared experiences, and the love that truly mattered. The aftermath of the fire had made it clear to Keanu that he wasn't just here to accumulate wealth or collect accolades. His purpose, he realized, was far more profound. It was about building a life based on giving, on connecting with others in a way that would leave a positive impact long after he was gone. The toy robot that had survived the fire had become a symbol of this new understanding. It wasn't just a piece of plastic. It was a symbol of resilience, of the memories that could never be taken away, no matter the circumstances. It was a reminder that sometimes it's the simplest things, the things that hold sentimental value, that truly make life meaningful. Keanu had always been focused on achieving great things, but in the wake of the fire, he understood that the most significant accomplishments were those that affected others' lives. It wasn't about being remembered for his wealth or fame. It was about being remembered for the way he made people feel, for the way he helped them. He thought back to the days after the fire when he had shared the news with his son. Despite the loss, X had remained calm, even optimistic, understanding that the things they'd lost didn't define them. It was the love they shared that mattered most. This realization was the foundation upon which Keanu would now build the rest of his life. He had been given a second chance, and he was determined to make it count. As Keanu sat quietly, reflecting on all that had transpired, the enormity of the fire and the way it had reshaped his perspective became even clearer. It was easy to get lost in the fast pace of life, especially when there were endless responsibilities, goals, and expectations to meet. But now, in the wake of the fire, he saw things differently. His priorities had shifted. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The fire had caused significant damage, both financially and emotionally, but it had also provided clarity. It was as if the universe had stripped away the distractions, leaving him with only the things that truly mattered. Keanu no longer felt the need to focus on the fleeting nature of wealth or the pursuit of further success. Instead, his focus was now on legacy, on the impact he could have on the lives of others, particularly those who needed help the most. As he sat there, the warmth of the fire still fresh in his mind, Keanu thought about the community he wanted to build. He envisioned a place where people could come together, support each other, and grow stronger through shared experiences. The idea of helping those in need, of giving without expecting anything in return, felt more aligned with his core values than any business venture ever had. The realization that he could use his resources and influence to make a tangible difference in the world filled him with purpose. Keanu had spent so much time chasing success, but now he understood that success wasn't about accolades or recognition. It was about helping others, making a difference where it mattered most. This moment of reflection became the catalyst for Keanu's next chapter. His journey of selflessness and charity had only just begun, but he was ready to embrace it wholeheartedly. No longer driven by the need to prove himself, he was driven by the desire to create a legacy of compassion and service. Keanu pulled up to the familiar driveway, the same one he had walked countless times as a child. The house before him was modest, though it held more memories than any mansion or estate ever could. It was here that he had learned the value of family, hard work, and simplicity, values that had shaped the man he was today. His heart swelled with a mix of nostalgia and gratitude as he parked his car and stepped out, breathing in the familiar scent of the air. The house hadn't changed much over the years. The paint on the walls had faded a bit, the garden that once flourished was now overgrown, and the small wooden swing that had once been his favorite spot to play was no longer hanging from the oak tree out front. But to Keanu, these minor changes were insignificant. What mattered were the memories. Memories of days spent running through the halls with his siblings, of long conversations with his mother over dinner, of laughter shared with friends who had come to the house for summer barbecues. As he stood there, taking in the sight of the home that had been the backdrop to his childhood, Keanu felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This place, simple as it was, had given him a foundation, an understanding of life that he hadn't fully appreciated until now. It was here that he had first learned about love, kindness, and the importance of being true to oneself. Keanu walked slowly up to the front door, his fingers brushing against the weathered wood of the porch railing. He had spent so many hours here, thinking, daydreaming, and growing. This was where he had learned the lessons that had guided him throughout his life, even when he veered off course. As he stood on the threshold, he was reminded of his mother's quiet wisdom and the values she had instilled in him. It was a humbling experience, standing in front of the house where it all began. The world had changed so much since then, and so had Keanu. He had experienced success, fame, and all the trappings that came with it. Yet, in this moment, he felt a deep connection to the boy who had once lived here, who had dreamed of the future with wide eyes and an open heart. He thought of the challenges he had faced along the way, the loss, the struggles, the moments of doubt, and how they had shaped his perspective on life. Keanu took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping inside the house that had shaped him. The familiar creaks of the floorboards beneath his feet brought a wave of warmth and comfort. He hadn't been here in years, but it felt like no time had passed at all. The house still held the echoes of laughter, the whispers of old conversations, and the love that had once filled every room. As Keanu stepped deeper into the house, his eyes scanned the rooms that had once felt like his whole world. The living room was just as he remembered, the worn-out sofa where he'd spent countless hours watching TV with his siblings, the old coffee table that had seen better days, and the family photographs on the walls. Each picture told a story of birthdays, holidays, and the simple moments that had made up his childhood. He walked into the kitchen, where the smell of his mother's cooking still lingered in his memory. The small table in the corner had been the center of family gatherings, the place where they shared meals, stories, and laughter. He could almost hear his mother's voice, soft and comforting, asking about his day, giving advice, and teaching him about life's most important lessons. It was here, in this small, humble kitchen, that he had learned the value of listening, of being present, and of always showing kindness to others. Keanu moved slowly through the rooms, taking in every detail as if trying to capture every memory that flooded back. The hallway, lined with photographs of family vacations and school pictures, had always felt like a timeline of his life. He paused in front of a photo of himself at graduation, young and full of hope, standing beside his family, proud of what they had all accomplished together. He could remember the feeling of standing there, ready to take on the world, unsure of what the future would hold, but certain of the love and support that would always be there to guide him. He walked up the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the quiet house. The walls here were decorated with more photos, pictures of his siblings growing up, of moments that had seemed so ordinary at the time, but now felt like treasures. When he reached the top of the stairs, he stood in front of the door to his old bedroom. The memories came rushing back, filling him with a bittersweet sense of nostalgia. This room had been his sanctuary, a place where he had retreated to after a long day of school, a place where he had dreamed big and imagined all the possibilities life had to offer. He opened the door, and for a moment he just stood there, taking it all in. The room was mostly unchanged. The bed, the desk, and the shelves lined with books, some new, some old. The familiar scent of wood and paper filled the air, and Keanu couldn't help but smile. This room had been a safe haven, a place where he had grown into the person he was today. And while the walls might have aged and the furniture might have shifted, the essence of this room, the energy it had given him, remained. Sitting on the edge of his childhood bed, Keanu reflected on the countless hours he had spent here, dreaming of the future. The posters on the walls, the stars he admired, and the passion he'd once poured into scripts felt like distant memories. But now, they reminded him that the journey had always been about connection, relationships, shared experiences, and the impact he had on others. Touching the worn desk, he remembered the long hours spent writing and working, shaping the dreams that had guided his life. It was here that his ambitions had been born, and though he'd achieved success beyond his wildest dreams, the lessons learned in this room about perseverance and self-belief were still with him. At the window, Keanu gazed at the familiar streets, now seen with a new understanding. The memories of his youth, the people and experiences that shaped him, felt like pieces of the person he had become. While the world around him had changed, these roots had remained firm. The fire had shifted his perspective. While material things could be rebuilt, it was the love, lessons, and human connections that truly mattered. As he stood here, Keanu realized that the road ahead wasn't about what he had lost. It was about what he could give. As Keanu sat quietly in his living room, the outpouring of messages from fans, friends, and loved ones continued to flood in. The digital world had taken notice of his journey, of the resilience he'd shown through the fire, and the lessons he'd learned. Every message, every word of encouragement brought a warmth to his heart, reminding him of how interconnected we all are. He thought about how, in the midst of such personal loss, the kindness of others had illuminated his path. Keanu's reflection on the impact of his journey went beyond the fire and the physical destruction it had caused. It was about something deeper, how these trials had reshaped him, how the love and support he'd received from others had lifted him back up when he needed it most. It wasn't just the big gestures that mattered. Keanu realized that small acts of kindness, smiles exchanged, words of support, gestures of love, had a ripple effect that spread far beyond what anyone could imagine. Every time someone reached out to him, they were contributing to the creation of something greater than just a moment of solace. They were contributing to a movement of compassion. He remembered his own experiences, how the smallest things in life had made the greatest impact. A friend's call when he was struggling, a moment of quiet understanding, and the kind gestures from people who had been touched by his story. In that quiet reflection, he came to understand something powerful. Kindness, no matter how small, could shift the world in unexpected ways. As the messages continued to pour in, Keanu found himself moved by the shared humanity in them all. He hadn't asked for recognition or praise, but the gratitude expressed by those who had been following his story reminded him of the power of empathy and collective strength. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how much potential we each had to make the world a better place, one small act at a time. Keanu sat back in his chair, reflecting deeply on the significance of his journey. He thought about the devastation of the fire, the loss of his material possessions, and how he had made it through by focusing on what truly mattered: love, family, and the bonds that held them all together. The fire had stripped away the physical aspects of his life, but it had also given him the clarity he needed to see what was essential. His possessions could be replaced, but the moments, the memories, and the relationships he had built over the years were irreplaceable. It dawned on him that this experience wasn't just a test of survival, it was a turning point, a realization that the world was filled with endless possibilities for change. Keanu's heart swelled with gratitude as he thought of the people who had supported him through the darkest moments. He was surrounded by individuals who believed in him, and that belief had become the foundation of his strength. What struck him the most was how much the act of giving had come to mean to him. He hadn't simply been a receiver of kindness, he had become an active participant in this beautiful, growing circle of compassion. The toy robot that had been preserved in the fire, the item that seemed insignificant to others, had come to symbolize something far greater. It was a reminder of his childhood dreams, of his past, and of the resilience of the human spirit. It was a reminder that no matter the obstacles, there was always a way to keep moving forward. As Keanu sat there, reflecting on the overwhelming kindness of his fans, friends, and the community he had built, he realized the significance of this moment. It wasn't just about rebuilding his home. It was about rebuilding his life, with a new understanding of what really mattered. He had learned that the simple things, the acts of kindness, were what held the true value, and now he wanted to pass on that message. Keanu looked over the messages he had received. Words of encouragement, gratitude, and admiration. Fans from all over the world had expressed their support, sending him messages of hope and compassion. These simple gestures, often just a few words, had meant the world to him. He could feel the ripple effect of the kindness that had been extended to him, and it was clear that his actions had sparked something bigger than he had imagined. As he read through the heartfelt messages, Keanu couldn't help but feel a deep sense of humility. He hadn't done anything extraordinary, he had simply done what he felt was right, helping those who needed it most, without expecting anything in return. It was in the moments of quiet reflection that he realized how powerful these small acts of kindness truly were. They didn't need to be grand gestures to change someone's life. Sometimes, a simple listening ear or a warm smile could have an immeasurable impact. His thoughts turned to his son, X, and the lessons he had learned from this experience. It wasn't just about material success or fame. It was about making a real, lasting difference in the lives of others. Keanu knew that his journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. There were countless more people to help, more communities to support, and more lives to touch. His purpose was clear now, and it was more important than any award, any accolade, or any recognition. Keanu stood up from his chair, feeling the weight of his reflection settle in. He looked out of the window at the world beyond, filled with endless opportunities. He knew that his actions, no matter how small, could continue to inspire change. The story of his journey wasn't just about the fire. It was about finding purpose in the face of adversity and using that purpose to make a difference. The world was full of challenges, but it was also full of potential. Every act of kindness, every small step toward making the world a better place, created a ripple effect that could change lives. Keanu was determined to keep going, not for recognition, but because he believed in the power of compassion and connection.